Farm Ring. We're going to have a little conversation with Wayne first. And I came across Wayne several months back. One of the best things about working on the Nashville Arts Magazine, I'm the editor of the magazine, by the way. Deborah Warren is here. One of the best things for us is not the money, because we don't get paid. But one of the best things for us is when the phone rings and someone says, hey, my name's Wayne Brzezinka, and I want you to look at my work. And I got a postcard in, and I looked at this piece, and I couldn't stop looking at it. I said, who is this guy? What is this work? And I couldn't stop looking at this face. And I called him back and I said, man, who are you? He said, well, I'm Wayne Brzezinka. And I said, okay, all right, then. So I arranged to meet with him, and I absolutely went overboard and fell in love. And the piece of work that got my attention was this. I absolutely fell in love with it. He sent me an image of this, and I couldn't stop. I had it, he won't believe me. I had this taped to my computer, and I looked at it every day. I came to the office. And the more I looked at it, the more I became intrigued with this guy and what he was doing. I loved the woman. I loved the fact that she was black. I loved the fact that she was from Mogadishu. I loved the fact that she was in pain. I loved everything about it. I couldn't stop looking at him. So when I got to meet him, I was just blown away by what he was doing. And I'd never heard of him. And I'm in the arts, and I've never heard of Wayne Brzezinka. It's not to say that I'm bored. I just never heard of him.
Like everybody else.
And I couldn't wait to meet him. I went over to a place down there, Houston Station in Chestnut, to do the photography session. And he came up with that image. And I said, oh my God. And we've never, the cover of the Nashville Arts, everybody wants to be on the cover, of course. We've never really had an unknown artist on the cover. I said, I don't care. I want that on the cover of the Nashville Arts Magazine. It's still, to this day, probably my favorite cover that we ever printed. So thank you, Wayne, for the arts. Let's talk a little bit about the process. I mean, it's so colorful, it's so beautiful. I know a lot of it is commissioned. People like my good friend there, whose album cover you're doing. Some of these are album covers. Talk to us a little bit about how this starts. How does that phone call start? And someone says, hey man, will you do an album cover? And what's the process of getting that done?
Well, I'll backtrack a little bit. My experience is in graphic design, so I was a graphic designer for, and still am a little bit, dabble in it, but about 4 years ago I dove off the editorial illustration diving board, I guess, with the encouragement of an illustrator in town named Travis Foster. He's been kind of a mentor to me. And there's a subscription-based, what would you call it? Any client you'd ever dream of working for is listed on this paid prescription. You send out one click of an email. It's kind of like Emma, but they're all there. And people started biting. You know, the LA Times called. That was my first big call. I was like, oh, the crap is this? And it was late. It was like 6:30 at night, and they said, are you interested in illustrating an op-ed piece? An op-ed is an opinion page piece for a major newspaper like the Boston Globe or the LA Times and New York Times. And I said, absolutely. And that began this commission process. And during, I guess how that process unfolds is they have a topic, and most of the time it's just perhaps a headline. They don't even have the article written. And
I think we have one right here.
There is one right there for
Flying the Coop. And this is the piece that we just looked at.
It is, yeah. And that's, I think, right, hanging up right there. Right. That ran about 2 weeks ago. But
now, do they tell you what they want, or do they just say it's about, this is the subject, and then you come up with something? Or are they specific in their demands of what they want visually?
Sometimes they're specific, sometimes they're not. Good art directors are not specific. They turn it over to the artist. And a lot of times, like there was a piece for the Boston Globe that had emailed me and said, well, we're thinking about this Ivy League school. We're going to write a story on the Ivy League school who's going to present a class on conservatism. The writer has not written the article yet. Can you do it? Go. And I'm like, well, what do you do? You know. So I came up with this elephant, Republican. You know, the instructor was on top of the elephant, and then in front, the back of the heads of the students were looking at this instructor on top of the elephant, and it was, you know, they loved it. Right. And so a lot of times it's organic. It just kind of, you got to work quick. It's 2 days. You know, sometimes it's a 2-day process.
I've always been intrigued. Like, let's say I call you and say, you know, my daughter's graduating, I want something for my daughter's graduate. Is that enough for you to just kind of go, okay, I can do something here? Or I mean, how much information do you need to create this, is what I'm trying to get to when someone commissions it. How much information do you need to do that?
I love to find out about my subjects. Like, I would like to talk with you, sit down with you, you know, let's maybe tour your house. What do you like? What colors do you like? What, you know, tell me about yourself. What are your tastes? And but then sometimes people turn to me and say, just do you, you know, do whatever it is that you do. And but the sketching process is important, I think. You know?
I've always found it a little uncomfortable when you get to the money part. It's just going to cost me. You don't want to seem like you're a cheapskate, but you just don't want to seem like, you know, how do you come to that? I mean, do you sort of say, well, if it's a 2-day thing, it's going to cost me, you know, it's going to cost you $5,000. How do you arrive at that? I mean, how do you arrive at a price for this, is what I'm trying to get to.
Well, I'll be honest, the gallery is new for me. Like, this is a brand new experience because of you and because of Ann, you know, and so this is an entirely new experience. But the editorial process, the budgets they're flat rates.
Right.
They say, we have this much.
So they just tell you.
They tell you.
Right.
You want it or not, you know, and if it's, there are times you're going to say, no, sorry, I'll pass. You know, you take it. And you do it. Because it's worth it. Sure. Right.
It's more after they're dead.
And then other times, I mean, album packaging, that kind of goes up and down. If it's an independent artist or a major label artist, those budgets will vary depending upon who you work with.
Well, you got Beth Nielsen Chapman right here, so
Yes.
just want to make sure she's sitting right there.
I know you don't know me, but we'll talk.
I'm sold.
It's great. And the Willie Nelson thing, was that a commission piece right there?
It was for Pace Magazine. It was an album review about 2 albums ago for an album he had on Rounder Records, and that's what that was for.
So a wonderful collage process. Now, are you starting with drawings? I mean, do you map this out and you go, okay, I'll draw this, and then find the pieces to cut out and make this happen? Or do you just start with, okay, this is a great Martin guitar logo, I'll start with that and then build? How does that work?
The sketching process for me is important, just the concept, you know. I was talking with Taryn Parsons, I don't know if he's still here, but how you can create a piece of art that looks pretty, but in my mind, it's like, is that enough? Or should there be an extra message? Should there be a twist? And so during that sketching process for me, you know, what is that twist? You know, whether it be the strings turning into the threads of the boot, you know, what's that little extra kick? Which I always try to push until it comes. Sometimes it's okay not to have it, but, and does that make sense?
Absolutely.
What was the rest of the question?
The rest of the question is, I want to know about Mogadishu and what led you to this series of work right here. Yeah. What led to this? Because this is so powerful, I can't get past it. What was your experience with Mogadishu and how did this come about?
At that time, that was last summer, I believe, I was listening to NPR consistently, and they ran that story every day for about a week. And at one point I was working and I turned to the radio and I thought, I cannot even fathom not having food and walking for 20 days, you know, what is that like, you know? And I think I was getting ready to do my first show, that's right before I met you, and it wasn't my plan to create a bunch of, you know, images like that, but it just kind of came out of me, and it just happened, and they kept coming, and I thought, I don't know where they're going to end up, I don't know what's going to happen, but I feel like I have to create, you know, create.
It's almost like a song, isn't it? It just has to be born. You just can't hold it back. You know, it's just, and that's why I think that's why that piece works. It speaks to me so loudly on an emotional level. I mean, I had the same feeling when I looked at it, the despair, of you know, that she was going through. Extremely powerful. Any questions for Wayne from anyone out here? There must be a lot of questions for him because he's an interesting guy. Yes, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, in some of the pieces, it's interesting the different sources you've used in the collage. Like on the Thinker, you have a Venus flytrap off to the side. And I'm very curious about that one in particular, but I wonder if you could explain sometimes what makes you decide which different
what elements to use in the
put
picture.
in
How do you come to that? Yeah, good question.
That's a good question. Hi, Bruce. The Venus flytrap, I mean, that's an exotic plant and it looks cool, you know. Sometimes it has no meaning, but I thought, you know, regular flowers look beautiful, but what looks extra cool, you know, like a flytrap. So that's how that ended up in there.
I like the thought, it's capturing the thought.
See, and that's how you see it.
That's how you see it. That's a beautiful fact. Yeah.
And some of the other stuff, if you saw my studio, it is a complete wreck. I mean, there's crap everywhere. There's like papers, and it smells moldy in there because there's so much old papers and news stuff. And the best work, I think, for me, comes when I'm pasting and gluing and I see something on my foot, and I'm like, man, that looks cool. Let's take that and slap it down here. And that's how a lot of that stuff honestly ends up in there. And it's, you know, when I'm in the moment and I feel it, and I'm not trying to force it, that's when it just happens. And it's a subconscious thing, if that makes sense, where it just comes together. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Beth.
I'm so excited to hear that because out of chaos for me comes songs. So I try to talk about creativity when I teach workshops and things like that. And that just so captures this thing where you're talking about your studio being chaotic and you just learn to recognize when the creative flow is kind of giving you some clues, right? Do you ever see any of these finished, or do you just follow along blindly and then you just end up knowing as you get closer, it starts to reveal itself? Which way is that for you?
I think the latter, what you just said,
Yeah.
is I can feel when I'm pushing too hard, and I can feel
Yeah.
when it's not, you know.
And do you actually have any devices for getting your brain out of the way? I have a lot of different devices for getting my brain to go over there, you know. The
Yeah.
intellect sometimes gets in the way of that, doesn't it?
You know, if I'm commissioned by a big name like the Boston Globe, I'm like, this piece has got to be awesome. That's when I get in trouble, like
Yeah.
on the get-go. But if I go, oh, this is an interesting piece, well, let's see what happens.
Right.
It turns out great. You know, if that sets myself free internally to create rather than force it, you know what I mean?
And for those of you that don't know, Beth Nielsen Chapman wrote a song that Elton John said was the single greatest song ever written. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. It's not lost on us.
So the other question I have for you is, when did you actually recognize that you were an artist?
When I told you
At
so.
what age?
That's that was about 6 months ago. You know, I was sharing with somebody earlier. I remember being in kindergarten, coloring a picture. I was thrilled to death to be held back from recess because my coloring assignment wasn't finished. But, you know, in kindergarten, coloring in the back of the room, looking in on everybody else was where I was most comfortable. You know, and as I became older and look back on my personal story, know the mechanics of, you know, my life and my family history and all that stuff, I know that, you know, being creative is a good thing. My dad's very creative. He made a lot of these frames. Like he made, you know, this Willie Nelson frame and all these other ones. But what was the question?
When did you know? Do you have an awareness? I guess this is the question. Do you have an awareness of when you knew that you were an artist? When you started to be able to think of yourself as an artist?
Yes, I think in the last maybe, since I've been married to my wife Stacy, she's back there. When we first got married, she said, why do you always tell people you work with computers? This was like 15 years ago, because I was ashamed of it. I was ashamed of being creative, believe it or not.
Why?
And being an artist. You know, and that all has to do with my story. My dad was an alcoholic, and there was a lot of shame and stuff in my family. But as I've worked through that in the last 15 years, I think, you know, as I've embraced it, it's become a thing for me where I said earlier in an interview that as you do what you love and you push it out there, it finds its own home. And I was like, it's a great thing, you know, meeting Paul and Ann. You know, I can feel the connection and love between you all, and I'm grateful. You know, for
We're
that.
grateful for what you do. Any more questions?
What's the best brand of scissors?
Sorry? What's the name behind your scissors?
What's the best type of scissors?
Sharp ones. What's wrong with them?
You know that?
He's been following me around all night.